What's up, sports fans? This is the Lucas Ross Sports Channel, and it's time to give you my playoff projections for Week 9 of the 2023 college football season. So I'm going to give you my playoff projections here heading into Week 9 of the 2023 season. We are heading into Week 9, and we are just about a week away before the first playoff rankings come out. So we're going to give you my playoff projections here. Again, mostly we're basing this off of how the teams played from this past weekend. And also, we're not going to be basing it off of resumes of which teams have the most top 25 wins this year and everything as well. But again, you're going to see the same teams, from last week here. But, there's just going to be one new team here in my playoff projections for this week and everything, just because of how, things have been going this year. So, again, this is not an official prediction, but this is simply a projection just based off of what we've seen this year and which teams have been playing the best this year as well. And then at the end of this video, I'll give you my official predictions here if these games were to happen at least, tomorrow perhaps. So tomorrow I'll give you my New Year's Six Bowl projections as well, so stay tuned for that video tomorrow. So let's get right into it with my playoff projections here for Week 9 of the 2023 college football season. So here's the bracket for the college football playoff this year. Once again, the number 1 versus number 4 matchup will be held in the Sugar Bowl this year, and then number 2 versus number 3 seeded matchup will be held in the Rose Bowl. So let's start with my number 1 seed here. That number 1 seed for me is still going to be Georgia for the 9th straight week in a row. This Georgia team, they have been here at number 1 ever since the beginning of the season for me. I still think Georgia is the clear favorite to win the national championship, even though they don't have like a really good resume. I mean, obviously they don't have any top 25 wins. I still think this is a very dominant Georgia team, but again, if you look at the schedule coming up for Georgia, they have really good opportunities to win some top 25 games. Their first top 25 win might come against Tennessee, and then their next one might come against Missouri, and then obviously maybe against Ole Miss as well. So if, Tennessee, beats Kentucky this weekend, if they're still ranked in the top 25, Georgia, that would be a really good win for them in the top 25, spot and everything. And then if they also beat Missouri and Ole Miss, that would be 3 top 25 wins to end out the year, and then their next top 25 win would come in the SEC Championship. So that would be a good resume for Georgia to still clearly be the number 1 seed. So Georgia here is my number 1 seed again for the 9th straight week in a row. They're coming out of a bye week this weekend. They got Florida coming up in just a couple more days, so it should be a really good game between those two teams. And again, Georgia, played a couple weeks ago against Vanderbilt. It wasn't an impressive performance. Brock Bowers goes down with an injury. They lose him out for the rest of the year perhaps, but Georgia, it's not really going to be a concern for me if Georgia loses Brock Bowers for the rest of the year. So Georgia here at number 1, the clear favorite here to win the national championship again this year. Can they do a three-peat? We'll find out as we get into the rest of the season. But my number 2 seed now to the Rose Bowl here. My number 2 seed is still obviously going to be Michigan. Michigan, I've been very impressed with this team in the last 4 weeks, even though they don't have a good resume. They're kind of like Georgia. They have, a couple games in the regular season left that they can probably win some top 25 games. Maybe their next resume win would probably be, against Penn State, and that game is on the road. I think that game is going to be a very tough one for Michigan, but they also have a really good chance to beat Ohio State, a top 10 team. And I think with that top 10 win, if they beat Ohio State, they definitely get in to the college football playoff and definitely to the Big Ten championship. I don't think the Big Ten championship is going to be a ranked matchup, though. I mean, Iowa's not been, the best team this year. They just got out of the top 25 as well after losing to Minnesota. I mean, it's no telling which Big Ten East team is going to play in the Big Ten championship, but it's going to be very hard to tell who's going to play in the Big Ten West this year. For the West Division and everything. So Michigan and Georgia, again, they're both pretty similar. They don't have really good resumes. I mean, they don't have any top 25 wins, but these are clearly your 2 top teams in the country as of right now. So those are my top 2 teams, Georgia and Michigan. I got Michigan here at number 2. Let's go to my number 3 seed, and that team is obviously still going to be Florida State. Florida State has a pretty good resume. They have a win over LSU in the top 25, and they also have a top 25 win over Duke that just this past weekend. Florida State played well in the second half of that game. And they definitely have a really good resume than Michigan and Georgia does, but it's kind of hard to, predict against this Georgia and Michigan team. If they lose a game, maybe Florida State can probably move up here in the playoff rankings, but again, Florida State has just a better resume than Georgia and Michigan, but again, I'm going to keep them here at the number 3 seed. Georgia and Michigan are both undefeated, but that doesn't really matter. But, Florida State, they had that win again, like I said, over LSU in the top 25. Then they also got another top 25 win over Duke. So that was enough for me to keep Florida State here at number 3. But again, these are my top 3 teams. They've been my top 3 teams ever since, not week 1. Georgia, Michigan were here. Florida State got in here after a win over LSU. So they've been my number 3 seed for a very long time. This team has been very dominant at times. Sometimes they haven't, but they're clearly the favorites to win the ACC. You look at the rest of their schedule, obviously coming up. It's not really that tough, they don't have to play North Carolina in the regular season, which is good news. They don't have to play Louisville either, so that's the good news as well. So Florida State here remains number 3 for me in my college football playoff projections. Then we go to my number 4 seed, and I may have changed here from this past weekend. Last weekend I had Oklahoma here at number 4. You're probably thinking it's going to be Oklahoma again, but I've actually made a change here, and that number 4 seed for me is obviously going to be Ohio State. Ohio State here is my number 4 seed in my Week 9 projections. I know a lot of people are going to be surprised by this pick, but Ohio State has a better resume than Oklahoma. When you look at the resume for Ohio State, they have that win over Notre Dame early in the year, and then they obviously have that win over Penn State from this past weekend and everything. And, Penn State doesn't have a top 25 wins. That's the reason why Ohio State is here at the number 4 spot. But also, Texas's only win in the top 25 is Alabama. And, of course, when you look at Oklahoma, their only win is to, Texas. So that was a, better resume for, Oklahoma than Texas is. But again, Ohio State has the better resume than Oklahoma and Texas. They have 2 top 25 wins against Notre Dame, and then, of course, a win over Penn State this past weekend. And Ohio State's defense played pretty well in that game. They struggled, offensively, but, the offense doesn't really have to be good enough to be a really dominant team. The offense, the offensive line did their work a little bit in this game, but again, the defense is the big story for this Ohio State team. The defense just continues to be really good for the Buckeyes. And like I said, Ohio State gets in here as the number 4 seed for me just based off of resumes. And again, I'm basing this off of resumes here for the rest of these playoff projections for the rest of the year. So let's get now into the predictions here. These are my top 4 teams for Week 9. Georgia, Michigan, Florida State, and Ohio State. So let's now get into the predictions here. So we'll start with Georgia versus Ohio State. These two teams met last year in the playoff semifinal matchup. It was a very good game between these two teams. It was a high-scoring game, surprisingly. I think this time if these two teams met, it would be a really good defensive battle like it has been for both of these teams. This year, Georgia's defense has been pretty good. Ohio State's defense has been more good than Georgia's, but end of the day, though, I know Georgia, didn't play this past weekend, but I'm still going to pick Georgia to win this game. I think Georgia clearly is the better team than Ohio State. But again, I think Georgia wins this one here, just based off of what I've seen so far. I still think Georgia has, the better defense than Ohio State. But again, it's going to be very hard to tell as we get into the rest of the year. But that is my official prediction there for that semifinal matchup between Georgia and Ohio State. Let's now go to the Michigan versus Florida State game. Once again, for maybe the 8th weekend in a row. Michigan and Florida State both, are very similar in offense and defensive positions. I think defensively, Michigan has the better defense, and then I think offensively, again, Michigan is really better than Florida State on that side of the football. This would, like I said, would be a shootout type game. But I think, Michigan, they have been very impressive in the last 4 weeks of the college football season. So I'm going to pick Michigan here again to win it here in the semifinal matchup against Florida State. And that brings me to my national championship game. Once again, it's Georgia versus Michigan. Georgia and Michigan, like I said, would be a defensive battle here. Based off of what I've seen in the last 4 weeks, though, Michigan has definitely improved on the offensive side of the football. And that tells me that Georgia's defense, I think, could have a hard time against this Michigan offense. I think they can run the football in this Georgia team as well. With that being said, Michigan, like I said, has been impressive to me in the last 4 weeks, and that kind of is telling me that Michigan maybe could make a jump into the playoff rankings and also maybe make a jump to win a national title. So for the ninth week here, I'm going to go with Michigan here to win a national championship against Georgia, like I said, in the defensive battle. But I think Michigan just overall the better offense in this game. So I'm going to go with the Wolverines here. Again, for my projections here for week number 9 of these playoff projections for 2023 college football season. But these are my playoff projections heading into week 9 of the 2023 college football season. And again, my top 4 teams are Georgia, Michigan, Florida State, and Ohio State. Let me guys know what you think about these playoff projections. Do you agree or disagree? Also, give me your playoff teams, top 4 teams down in the comments below. And stay tuned here for more sports content videos on my Lucas Ross Sports Channel.